As far as how to capture a deer was a common question that I got, and basically it was just a big net was our main method of capturing deer. It's a 60 by 60 net we strung up like a volleyball net, and we baited it with corn, rice bran, grits, it didn't matter, and sat in the stand with night vision. Deer would come underneath the net and we'd drop it on them. 1, 2, 3, or as many as 5 deer at a time. Once you got the deer in the net, it quickly becomes a mess. You can imagine a 200-pound deer having a net dropped on it. He's not really happy. As soon as they were caught up in the net, they would entangle themselves pretty good. We immobilized them, basically put them to sleep using a couple of drugs. They were usually asleep within about 5 minutes from the time we jumped out of the stand, ran over there, and gave them shots. Every deer we got our hands on, we ear tagged. Any deer that was bigger than about 80 pounds, we put a radio collar on. The fawns were just too small to carry that radio collar, so we just ear tagged them and let them go. When we had the deer on the ground, we collected any kind of data that we could, antler measurements, sex. We aged them to either fawn 1.5 years or older than 1.5 years. And for reference, when I talk about juveniles, that's 1.5 years old deer. And then as soon as we were done with them, we'd take them out of the net, we'd give them another shot, wake them up, and off they would go right there on the site. The second method we used was a dart projector, basically a dart gun. And a lot of people ask, so you dart a deer, then what? And the darts that we use, you can see the dart sticking out of the back of that deer's rump. And the back of that dart has a transmitter in it. And so that deer would run off and we would be able to track it down. So in the springs of 2007 and 2008, we marked ear tagged 65 deer, and as far as radio collars, we collared 48 adults. It was 37 bucks and 11 does. We were pretty surprised that we caught so many bucks compared to does, but actually after the season, the does, in my opinion, were smarter than the bucks because the does had been harassed and passed on, and y'all had educated them, got out of the stand while they were in the field, so they were actually tougher for me to catch. And we actually caught more older deer in this case, and especially older bucks, and you can see that in that graph. Most of the deer that we caught were mature deer. Once we had a collar around their neck, we tracked them any way that we could, whether it be, most of the time it was by four-wheeler or by the truck, in the case we had one right on the interstate that I could literally pull right off the interstate and get him. Or if we lost one because of dispersal or whatnot, they would send us up in a plane and we'd find them that way. We tried to track them about 3 times a week, and the way we tracked them was basically using triangulation. It's a VHF signal that the collar puts out, so we use an antenna and a compass and a GPS to basically triangulate a position. And this is a graphic from the computer program that we used. You can see I took 4 bearings on that deer to come up with a location. And that location is where he was at that time and place. And we take that dot basically and put it over an aerial photo. And over a year or 2 years worth of time tracking that deer, we basically come up with a pretty picture with a bunch of dots on it. And those dots represent where that deer was, and we can make a lot of inferences from that map. Since we had collars on them, like I said, we also got to see some of our 1.5-year-old bucks disperse. And these 1.5-year-old bucks will do this. It's a natural thing that they do. The mothers will either kick them out in the springtime, and so the mothers will kick them out of their natal home range where they were born at, and that male will travel to a new area completely different. In our case, it was between 2.5 and 8.5 miles that deer would travel. And he would set up a new home range in that new area. So we had 11-year-and-a-half-old bucks, and 5 of them dispersed to a new home range. And we saw this in February and April. There are other studies that see it happen in the fall, and they relate that to some buck aggression, male aggression between each other. And so some studies will have it in the fall. We saw it in the spring. And the arrows are pointing where the deer came from and the direction that they traveled. And you can see, I didn't point out earlier, but that is Interstate 10 that runs right through the study site. As far as space use, like I said, we basically have dots on a map. We use the GIS program to figure out how much area that deer used in a season or a year. So home range, when we talk about home range, is basically, we call it a 95% contour. And that describes that deer's overall use of an area throughout a season or a year. And then you could also talk about core area, and sometimes core area could be even more important. And that's basically the 50% contour, and that's an area of concentrated use. And it says something important about that area because that deer is selecting that area for something special, whether it be bedding cover or protective cover or accessibility to food or accessibility to mating opportunities. It's something about that area that's special. So we had 36 bucks that we did home range analysis on. And this is what I'm going to go through for seasons. For spring, for juveniles, the average home range was 572 acres. For adult bucks, so 2.5 and older, was 380 acres for spring. Summertime, 213 acres for juveniles. Adults was 174 acres. And then during the fall, what happened is those 1.5-year-old bucks that we caught in the spring, they then joined the adults in the fall. And so we only looked at adults at that point, and it was 292 acres for the fall for home ranges. And then again, looking at core area, if you pull up core area, that's that area of concentrated use. Look at the difference between home range and core area. In spring for the adults, it goes from 380 acres for a home range to 63 acres for a core. Pretty small little core area. Look at during the summer. 174 acres for the adults, for home range, 33 acres for a core. Not moving much. So again, the 1.5-year-old males, we only looked at them for spring and summer. And then this is the way we basically delineated our seasons. It was spring, encompassed all the spring green up and no hunting seasons. Summer was all your hot months. And then fall basically was all of hunting season, October 1st to February 15th. For the females, we had a smaller sample size, same seasons, but in general, in most of the other studies, females won't use nearly as much space as your males. And we saw the same thing. Spring, summer, and fall, all under 200 acres. Fall was even under 100 acres. And core area, all of them under 40 acres. So the females, the does, they didn't go anywhere. You can see in these two graphs, green is your spring, red is your summer, and the brown is fall. And that's acres on your x-axis over there. So that's for juveniles, adult males, and females. Basically holds the same pattern for home range and core area, so there's not a whole lot of difference in the pattern. What is interesting to look at is look at in the spring, so you're looking at the green, juveniles move more than adults. And we can relate that back to, well, it's the end of the hunting season, there's less pressure on them. Hunters are out of there, they've removed the bait, so maybe those deer have to search a little bit further to get that food instead of being able to go right to that rice bran pile. End of the winter is a pretty tough time to be a deer because they've run, you've seen deer, they're run down after the rut, so they're searching out food at that point. And then also maybe a little bit of late breeding in this area. Peak rut was about January 13th. And then also for the juveniles, we also had that dispersal movement, so that really related. You can see green for the juveniles, a lot bigger than the green for the adult males. Summertime, we saw a reduction in space use, and that makes sense because we do the same thing in the summer. I don't like moving around a whole lot when it's 98 degrees outside, and the deer did the same thing. There's abundant resources during the summer. In those cutovers that you saw earlier, plenty of resources. Deer group up. They have the males group up in little bachelor groups. They're friendly amongst each other during spring and summer, whereas they're not as friendly during the fall. And then, like I said, climate is the main factor here. And then for the females, they'll reduce space use because they're pregnant and they're about to give birth to fawns. In the fall, we saw reduced space use for our females, which has been seen in some other studies, and they relate that to, they think maybe the females are actually reducing space use, reducing their movements to make their locations more predictable to some of the males that are in the area, which is pretty interesting. And then increased space use in males, which is commonly seen because of rut activity in the fall.